sponsors, yeah.
I mean, do you want to speak into the mic?
I guess I could. I was literally just joking. It's totally fine. Oh no, I'm just really happy that Fernando is here and we've gotten to hang out and talk, and he's sharing his work with us, and I think it's a really special thing because when I found his work, I was extremely inspired instantly. Like, I have to talk to this guy. I want to know more about this work, and had dreams of bringing you out here, but didn't know if that was actually going to pan out. So I'm really glad that it did, and I'm really excited just to be able to share this work with everyone in Denver for the next, 2 months. And I'm also really glad that you're going to talk about it because there's so much depth and so much going on within each project that it's really fun.
Yeah.
So without further ado.
Well, thank you, Esther, for inviting me. It's been, since the pandemic, it's been kind of a bummer because, I haven't been able to get out to talk or even to visit shows or show, really, because I feel like it's just ramping up. So you're one of the first ones nationally that I've been able to get out again. I've been showing locally, and so this was a pleasure, and that's why I jumped at the chance. I was like, yeah, of course, I'm coming out. That'll be fun. And you guys did such a wonderful job installing the work. I'm really blown away, really. So thank you and the team. Okay, so it's just you guys, so we can get started here. Hold on. Okay. Oh, we got a customer. Okay, so tonight I'm going to just walk you guys through this idea that has been kind of dominating my world for the last 20 years. So what you're seeing here is actually a piece called Voice that we'll talk about later. But the idea that sort of got in my head years and years ago was this: the ghost in the machine. I didn't really understand that it's been sort of my obsession until recently, until the last 5 years, where I was like, oh right, yeah, I'm crazy about that idea, about a machine imbuing some sort of spirit or some sort of soul. And actually, this image in the background is important for later. It's The Plains of Heaven by John Martin, and we'll get back to that in a little while. But one of the first pieces that embodied that idea was this drawing machine when I was, this is my BFA show, so I'm taking it all the way back. I was fascinated, first of all, with automatic painting and drawing. This was my obsession when I first started, and I think it's because my dad had a bunch of surrealism books in the library that he brought over from El Salvador. They were in Spanish, so I couldn't actually read them. So I had to sort of imagine what it was about. Later, I found out what surrealism really was about and automatic writing. So when I got into undergraduate school, I decided to sort of design a machine that could draw by itself. What's interesting, and we'll get back to this idea of the AI, this hasn't gone away from the public's opinion, or interest, this idea that a machine can make art. So this was where I started. A machine that could make art. And this was actually, that's ballpoint pen that you see there. But then within that idea of the ghost in the machine, there was also this quote that I heard when I was a little kid, and you might recognize it. This is where you nerds come out. All that is visible must grow beyond itself and extend into the realm of the invisible. And that's actually a quote by this guy, Dumont, who's a character in the movie Tron. But actually, it really is not his quote. It's actually a philosopher. Of course, I can't remember his name because Dumont stole the show, right? And he tells it to the heroes, right? That, it's this philosophy that the old programmers had of I guess, code and the reason for why they were making the Tron world, right? But it kind of stuck in my head, and I think that with the ghost in the machine never is too far away from my thoughts. And in fact, in grad school, I designed a machine that could you could see the phrase. So what you see there is just this bar of white, but inside of that bar is actually a material that a camera can see, and so you can read the quote, "All that is visible must grow beyond itself and extend itself into the invisible." And honestly, at the time when I made this, I didn't really understand why I was so fascinated with it. Only until recently do I get now why I was so into it, and I'll come back to it in a second. But right around the same time, this is like my MFA, one of my MFA works. Right around the same time, I was also designing this. Oops. This is called Looking for God. I found this old AM radio. I met my wife in grad school, and when I was courting her, there was this AM radio in like the photography area that they all used inside of the darkroom. And I was playing with it one day while I was just like chatting her up, And I noticed that in the AM radio, there's so many references to God, to religion. You can literally hear the word God, G-O-D, so many times if you just tune the radio. And I thought, oh, that's really cool. I wonder if I could make a robot or a machine that could detect the word God and then ring a bell.
Oh my God. It's a clock radio.
It's a clock radio. Actually, the photography department was really pissed at me because I stole their radio. But whatever, I mean, it's for art, right? So in this case, it's an early AI. It's actually really, really stupid AI. All it's doing is it's looking for the waveform of God. So I recorded the word God from the radio. It took me a long time. And then took that little snippet, and all this machine does is looks for an exact duplicate of that waveform. And if it finds it, which is astronomically impossible, right? It's like winning the lotto. Then it rings a bell, so in my mind, like Nirvana, and then immediately quantifies it. And you can kind of see the counter on the right-hand side there. So Looking for God and the previous artwork kind of set up this, this future work into the only word that I really can use to define is spiritualism. And it's taken me a long time to use that word. Because, I learned about spiritualism when I was an undergraduate in graduate school, but I never realized that I was doing it until kind of later. This was just more like a techno fascination with me. So here's a little snippet. Unfortunately, I usually zoom past this, but I don't know if I can do it with this controller. So it's a really crude mechanism. It just rotates the dial and takes a sample over and over and over. I don't know. I was really, at the time, really into my machining, so I was trying to show it off, I guess.
You use the word crude, but this doesn't look crude to me.
It's pretty crude.
This looks extremely.
For me, it's crude.
Yeah.
So Looking for God, was also one of my first artworks that entered the canon, the larger art and technology canon. Actually, the drawing machine also entered it too. So it was weird. It kind of captured the imagination of the larger art, culture in art and technology.
But it didn't actually...
It never found God. It's very sad. It never found God.
I thought it might have been dinging.
Well, actually, this very question comes up later again. This idea that the audience is like, well, did it happen? So put a pin on that too. So then, a couple years later, once my wife and I moved to the Albany area, I got hired at Union College as an assistant professor. They asked me to do a site-specific installation in this old abandoned church, and I was fascinated with the Eucharist area. This is where the priest would do his thing, if you're Catholic in any way. And so I thought, I can make a machine dispense the Eucharist, right, the communion. But first you have to go through this little interface at the top. It asks you questions like related to the 10 Commandments. Have you been a jerk to your parents, all that stuff. And so if you say, you atone, and then once you do, it drops a little wafer and a little wine. And here's...
Who needs church?
Here's... Well, what's interesting is that the Vatican actually does this because on holy days, they need to give the entire pilgrimage that's there, which is thousands and thousands of people, the communion, and so they have a machine do it. And what's interesting about that is that there was this guy that told me that I was going to hell. That, you know, at the opening he came and he was like, he waited to talk to me after, you know, people were talking to me. Came up to me, he's like, "You're going to hell." I was like, "Oh my God." Like, no one's ever been such a jerk to me at an opening. And then I wanted to tell him, but he just ran away. I wanted to tell him, well, you know, this isn't new. Like, this is kind of like my version, but the Vatican's been doing this forever. Like, they had mechanical versions back in the, you know, early 19th century. So, like, you know, it's just another way. So, that's the setup. Those are all these kind of quasi-spiritual, looking for God, the invisible ghosts, you know, ghosts in the machine. I'm walking around New York one day in the city with a group of friends of ours. You know, actually it was Fifth Avenue like it is here. This is a picture from like Google Earth. We're walking and I'm kind of falling behind, and this kind of crazed person, kind of like this guy here, came up to me because everyone else was past me, right? And he got really close, which is already like, you know, if someone comes that close to you, you're already on guard. But he whispers in my ear this: "Can you hear them? Ghosts are jealous." First of all, I was like, "Get away from me." Right? But then, you know, he sort of mumbled, scattered away, and I joined my friends, and I told them, and they didn't care. But it resonated with me. Like, I couldn't stop thinking about, what are ghosts jealous about? And can I help them, right? Like, if you're jealous, it's because you're missing something or you're envious of something. And what could ghosts possibly be envious of? The living. And why are ghosts jealous of the living? They can turn on the lights. They can have wine. They can use this clicker. They can just interface in the world. And so from...
Also, though, can you hear them? I mean, like,
Well, that's another question, right? But from like a design question, like a user interface. Well, to sort of like paraphrase that, right? First, if you're going to design for the dead, you must assume that the dead are real, right? Ghosts are real. Let's get past that, right? So once you get past that, you can start designing for them. And one of the hardest things as a designer is, well, how do you do that? How do you design for the dead? They don't have a body. They don't have any way of interfacing in the world. There's pseudoscience that says that you might be able to detect them with electromagnetic waves and temperature and infrared and a bunch of other stuff that they've come up with. And so I was like, okay, well, at first I was like, well, maybe I'll make interfaces specifically for them. And then I realized that if you're dead, you might not be able to learn a new interface. Like, if you give someone that died in the 18th century an iPhone, they're not going to be able to touch. They're not. How do you do that? How do you teach the dead to update their password? You know, you can't do it. So I had this sort of, it was a thought experiment, right? It was just sort of like, this is my face, right? Like, how, like what, how do you design for the dead, right? So I start tweeting. And this is when Twitter wasn't like what it is now, right? It's like still kind of like an artistic platform. And so I think, you know, I just did several tweets for actually it was like a year of just me thinking about this thought experiment. So this is one of the first ones, and then, products for the living impaired, phantom flakes, augmented ghost reality glasses, dead man disco shoes, paranormal smartphone. That one, that's why I was like, you can't do a paranormal smartphone. At least not for someone that's dead more than 50 years. And then this tweet was like an important one. Ghosts, noun. Our universe momentarily intersecting with the universes that our parallel universes selves live in. If somehow the multiverse was like intersecting and you're still alive in the other universe, maybe for that moment you can see yourself or you can see someone, apparition, and maybe that's what ghosts are, right? This is just me, again, thought experiments. So at the same time, I was really fascinated in quantum entanglement. And it's probably from this thought experiment, right? Like, I've always been an amateur physicist, really. And I can't do the math, but I read physics papers. I don't know why. My wife thinks I'm crazy. And one of the things that you'll learn in quantum entanglement is that it's a physical phenomenon that occurs when a group of particles are generated, interact, or share spatial proximity in such a way that the quantum state of each particle or of the group cannot be described independently of the state of the other. So to paraphrase it, if you come entangled with anything, there are some theorists out there that believe that you actually become entangled at the quantum level, at the subatomic level, that you're permanently attached to them no matter how far away you are from the object. And this other gentleman, Roger Penrose, and a few other out there scientists, theorize that the mind is also quantum as well. And so if you're entangled with objects at the quantum level, and our mind and consciousness is also quantum, perhaps when we pass, we become entangled permanently with everything that we've encountered and everybody that we've encountered forever, right? And it doesn't matter how far away the soul or the spirit is in the universe, they're still entangled. And this is one of the things that quantum entanglement that they don't understand. They're like, how is this possible that these two particles are interacting with each other and they're on the other sides of the globe? They're breaking the speed of light. They don't understand it yet. It's still a mystery. It's a ghost story.
What about the transcendent self, though?
Well, if you hold your questions,
Never born, never dies.
just hold your questions because I got a lot to go through.
Right.
So this is when I realized that instead of creating new interfaces for the dead, what I needed to do is just find objects that the dead were already familiar with. And that's when the estate sales began. Because an estate sale is the only place that I know that I can find things that the living interacted with a lot and then perhaps are entangled with. And I figured that the thing that they used the most would be the thing that they got entangled the most with. So maybe a Mr. Peanut or a Child of Prague, which we'll talk about. For those of you seeing this video, you don't see that on our presentation. We're doing it in the gallery, and the artworks are actually installed. So anyways, here's another estate sale. By the way, that sword right there, if I saw that in the estate sale, I would have bought it immediately and created a robot for that sword. Because not only am I looking for objects that seem well used, but also that are a challenge to make a robot with, right? Because I like making robots. And so the first, so this is the interface. What you see on the left is a temperature monitor, so it's always reading temperature. You see it in the middle there, 63 degrees Fahrenheit in this case. And then on the bottom again, that sort of cylindrical metal thing, that's an infrared sensor. And then on the right is the EMF. And so the robots simply monitor all three of these all the time, just constantly. And if a certain pattern goes off, actually it's just a fluctuation in either two or three of them, it deduces that a paranormal event is happening, and it triggers the automation in whatever way. And so the first one, at a certain point in this analysis, I definitely started feeling like these guys, right? And you guys probably recognize these guys from Ghostbuster fame, right? I'm definitely these guys. I'm a professor that is into paranormal and is being funded by that university to basically dive into looking for ghosts, right? And sometimes I call my pieces ghost traps. And it's probably from some time ago when I was really fascinated with Ghostbusters. So the first piece was this. It was her bell. I went into this estate sale and I immediately was tripped out because this lady had a collection of bells, and it was overwhelming how many bells this woman had. Every room in her house had at least 100, 200 bells. They were everywhere, all types, in boxes, used. And inside of that chaos, I found this one, which I believe is a choir bell. So this was used, right? I don't know if she was a churchgoer or not, but very basic mechanism. If a ghost is detected, it rings the bell. So this is the first one. Then the second one was his minerals. This was a very spiritual guy. I don't really know their stories. I can't go up to the bereaved family and be like, so I want to make these artworks for the dead, and it's just rude and weird. Every so often they find out, but I kind of keep it to myself, and I create a story from what I've observed of the estate sale. And so this one, this gentleman clearly collected minerals. He made his own incense, so that is the first batch of, or the last batch of incense that he made. I actually have a ton of it. It's like a huge ream of incense that I have at home from him. And so what I wanted to do is create a mechanism to let him let him light his incense. And for those of you that are out there that design robots, be really careful when you design a robot with fire. Like, really careful. For instance, if you're going to have a robot light fire, immediately have something for the robot to extinguish the fire, which is in my first design, not part of the design, and the first one lit up. It caught on fire. So here's a little video of his minerals. We'll just play it for a second. What was interesting about this is when I bought all the minerals, the folks at the estate sale thought that I knew something about the minerals and they wanted to charge me more. Yeah. But I didn't know anything about the minerals.
What are they in?
Just these little glass jars.
Wow, that's weird. That's cool.
And they kept them in water. I don't know why. And actually, that's been a whole thing because this piece has shown recently at the Minneapolis Institute of Art, and refilling it with water and making sure the minerals are okay. That has been a challenge. So this is again, normally I would probably fast forward this, but we'll watch the whole thing here. So the matches, some of the matches I found, but unfortunately they were kind of old, so full disclosure, those aren't his matches. And so we'll just wait for it to light the match here. So if a paranormal event happens, it lights the match. Here's what's curious, and this is when I first started realizing what I actually had made. I didn't understand what I had entered into. I was making machines for the dead, designing machines for the dead. It was like I was a bionics engineer. Instead of making an arm, a missing arm, I was making a whole body, like the dead don't have a body. So that's how I was seeing it. I knew I was into something different when I installed this for the first time. And the fire marshal went through and asked me that this is a fire hazard, and I was like, this is designed for the dead, right? So like the chances of it going off are 0, maybe less than 0, and he believed that it would. And so this is when the larger conversation started for me, the faith part of this, the belief, right? The ghosts are real. I didn't know that there were so many believers in ghosts. I didn't know. I figured there'd be some. From my experience with this series, it's actually the majority of people believe that there is ghosts and that they interact with us and this and that. That was totally something I learned. Mr. Peanut, or his butter, this was inside an estate sale of a collector of toys. The toys were everywhere. Most of them I couldn't afford because they were mint. And so I found the little Mr. Peanut on the ground there and had to design this whole mechanism so that one peanut went through at a time because the toy is actually terrible. It's not made, oh, look at that. That's the reality. This is a toy for a child. My dog loved that ooze. He really enjoys that ooze. But, since the toy wasn't designed well, like my first instinct was just jam a bunch of peanuts in the hat and start cranking, and immediately I realized I couldn't do that. And so that's actually why I had to design that little robot on the top of the hat to deliver one peanut at a time in case a ghost, came along and wanted to make peanut butter. So this is their words. This was one of the weirder estate sales because the 3 siblings were there and they were fighting. It was really like awkward. Like they're yelling at each other. These 2 were academics. Their house is filled with books, like just all over the place. Also like just stuff from them traveling. And so I bought their dictionary and I bought a book of Les Miserables, and I turned the page to purgatory. Because I figure if you're in purgatory, you'd like to read the definition, right? Like, where am I really? But deliverance in this is that it'll turn on the light for them so they can read, and it'll flip the page. So maybe they're not in purgatory anymore. So there's a nice, a nice gesture for the dead there. This gets us back to the plains of heaven. John Martin, I found some candlesticks, which you see on the left and right here, and this painting, a reproduction of it, in an estate sale in Chicago. And I was drawn to it immediately. And so I bought the little image and the candlesticks. The candlesticks looked like they had been used. There was still wax on them. And so I designed something to, a robot to turn on the candles. This time I used a barbecue thing because it's safer than lighting a match. A match was challenging for sure. I don't have video of this one or of the previous one. So the Shadow series, which I called Machines for the Dead, took off. People seemed to, it really sort of turned on their imagination. And eventually a museum caught wind of it. The curator, Jody Throckmorton, caught wind of it and decided to commission me at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Art to do a much larger version of one of the Shadows series. And they invited me into their collection. Now, once upon a time, Fernando was getting himself ready to go study medicine. And this painting, The Gross Clinic, which is cropped here just for the sake of HD, The Gross Clinic has always been like this painting that I've loved, even before I was pursuing art. And when I found out that Thomas Eakins, the painter of this painting, was a professor at PAFA, and also like a renowned artist in that area, when I found out that they had his artifacts, it turned me on immediately. I was like, oh, I must access Thomas Eakins' stuff, right? And I thought, well, who knows what they'll have. They had his paint box, which came out to me like a holy relic, oh. Also, what's interesting about this box is that it's a twofer. His wife is also, was also used this box after he died. Those are not the paints. They don't know where those paints came from. It might have been the third user, but they don't know who that person was. But the paintbrushes are theirs. They also had, well, here's the beautiful box. He wrote that E on there, so he hand sculpted that. And then they also had his paint palette. And the very famous red chair that he's used in many and many of his paintings that you'll see here in a second. And so after studying him and learning a little bit more about him, I decided to create a studio for him, like full blown, with a robot that could let him draw, a system to let him mix paint, a robot to let him open his box, another robot to let him turn the red chair so that he could see it in prose, and this is the installation. And then additionally, what we did is we actually hired a model, several models, to pose for the duration of the show, which was 3 months. So every day, or every other day I think it was, a model would come and pose in the pose that Eakins used in his paintings, because he actually used photography quite a bit. And for a painter, in the early 1900s, this was like, honestly, like being an art and technology artist. And I kind of felt a kinship in that way, because painters weren't doing that yet. So he left a whole database of poses that he used in his studio for his models, and they were trained that way, and so they're in pose. Yeah, they were all naked. And students were allowed to come and draw, so it was kind of like an active studio throughout the 3 months. Here's another shot here. This is the red chair that unfortunately looks maroon. There's a station for the models to take a break back there. And it was just this sort of much larger version of the Shadows series. This is the machine, hold on. This is the robot that draws. This is basically a joystick for the dead. So there's 4 sensors that let it go up and down, left and right. And if you're dead and you want to draw, you can move the robot around and make a picture if you'd like. But if you're dead and you don't necessarily want to draw, but you want to see the thing move and make it draw, I programmed 5 of Thomas Eakins' photos into that robot. So it was like a secondary system that it will actually draw on its own. And here's the thing. Honestly, the video is important because a lot of people, they don't believe that I made them work for real. They just think I'm just talking metaphorically. But I go through great trouble making these things work. So this actually, and what's funny is that once I actually made a drawing machine for the dead, I also realized that I made a printer. So I could print out images, any image, and that image that it's printing there is actually one of Thomas Aiken's photos. So 5 of his photos are programmed inside of the machine, and we'll get back to that actually a little bit later. And here's a quick little video. If the dead decide to come around, I figure, you know, the chair could be positioned in a different way. The artist sort of sits over here, you know, back there, and so they could position the chair in a way and get into drawing. Unfortunately, this video, I don't know why we let the video play the entire rotation of the chair. So it'll play here in a second, and then we'll see the other mechanisms do their little business here. So here's the box. Now, I wasn't allowed to really leave the box, again, upstaged by my own art. That machine is designed to go off every so often. So here's the palette, you know, like it can, you know, you can like change colors and stuff. And here's the machine in operation. All right. It's going to go through the whole Our Father, so there's no way to stop it. Okay, so here's another pose. Here you can see the whole the whole installation. Oh, right. What I was going to say about the painting box, the museum was very worried that there might be a paranormal event because PAFA actually has ghost stories. And so many of the people at PAFA believe that that it's haunted, and they wanted me to like basically not turn on the motor, like leave the motor off basically, because they were worried that ghosts were going to open the box. And so it's one of the only times where I've actually like you know, purposely not had it on. So then this happens. So right around this time, this gentleman starts in our world. And it's hard for me to continue the Shadows series with all the stuff that's going on, especially when I'm in the city and I'm seeing this, right? Just the whole city exploding with protest and just, you know, anger, really. And I got sort of like taken away by it, really. My wife and I actually were in the city, and I hate to say it, but we were actually coming back from a Russian spa. We didn't know that was going on. And we ran into this giant protest. But one of the reasons I wasn't aware of it is that at the time I was an immigrant. I'm from El Salvador originally. And for me, going to a protest as an immigrant is not the best thing. Like, immigrants won't go to protests. Not a lot of us. I'm a citizen now, and I'll tell you about that in a second. But I had actually never been in a protest. This is the first time. And so we joined them, and you know, it was cool. But I also was like, who's watching? Right? Like, am I gonna like get tagged? Also, our orange president, like, I didn't know as an immigrant. I didn't know if I was gonna get kicked out of the country, even though I'd been here most of my life. So I immediately put in my papers for citizenship. Now I'm a citizen. But the idea of a protest never went away. And I was kind of sad that after, you know, a week or two of protests, people stopped, right? Like, they just went back to their jobs, got their coffee, and that was it. And so I was like, well, I could make a robot that just protests for us, right? Like I could do it for the immigrant, because we need proxies, right? The immigrant population has a voice. And this is actually the name of this piece of the installation. It's called Voice. And so I designed this protest for immigrants, but in a way, it's still part of this idea of the ghost in the machine. Because anything that if you forget that it's for immigrants, and you think about them as robots, we the people, think about it in relation to AI. We make America work, right? We are all dreamers. We are human for a robot, right? For an AI, that's what they want, right? They want to be human eventually. Do we look like aliens? Again, for the immigrant, that phrase definitely fits, but I also think for the robot as well. So there's a double entendre there. Come dream with us. We the people, right? I also wanted the protest to be kind of a parody of itself. So there's a resist button there. You go up to it, you press the button, and for 30 seconds, a protest happens. It's extremely loud. I bought surplus motors. And this was shown at the Spring Break Art Festival or Art Fair. Everyone hated me around me because for 30 seconds, no one could hear anything. And it was really popular, so people kept pressing the button. So it's this sort of idea of like, there's a lot wrapped up in it, but it's still kind of framed inside of that idea of the ghost and the machine. And then this happened. My wife and I were so lucky because we are not people that can afford this kind of house. But we got an enormous deal, and we got a mid-century modern home in the Buckingham Pond area in Albany. And I was a Bauhaus fan already. To be able to live in a sort of mid-century modern home, this was built in 1957, was a dream come true in many ways. And I became fascinated with mid-century modern information, all things mid-century modern, right? Having studied Bauhaus, I was now inside of Bauhaus. That's my studio down there on the ground floor, on the floor down there, and the house is upstairs. And because of that, we would go for strolls. We lived in downtown Troy, so we lived in kind of like an urban area. We would now go for walks. And when I was walking around with her, with my wife, I got this sort of weird sense that the suburbs, even though I had grown up in the suburbs, are kind of a little bit like hell, a little bit. They're weird, right? They're like isolated. They're not the greatest thing for the world, right? Like, not everyone can live in the suburbs, but everyone wants to live in the suburbs. But the whole world can't live in the suburbs. It's impossible. We'll destroy ourselves. And so, I just also was a pretty big fan of the Divine Comedy, and so I started designing an artwork around the Divine Comedy. And I wanted to sort of pay homage to all the illustrations and all the other artists that had done that in the past. And so I started making this. Again, feeding off of the mid-century modern aesthetic and the Bauhaus aesthetic, and twisting it with Dante's tale. This is called the Inferno, the Infernia. And it's basically, I believe, for me, it's a community center for the dead. So you wake up in hospice, which is the bottom floor here. And there's some dogs there waiting for you. Part of me is Mayan and Native American, not North American, but Central American. And so for us, dogs are very spiritual, and some say that they're waiting for us on the other side. You wake up there, no one tells you what's going on. You just got to figure out what this community center is. By the way, this is a very small version of it. I have plans to make the entire Divine Comedy from hell to heaven. So this is the beginning. This is in process. And each one of these stations is basically one of the cantos of the poem. Like where Virgil and Dante sort of encounter different things, right? I'm not going to get into each one because we have limited time. I already see that I'm a little over. But like each one sort of will go through. My idea eventually will be that all of the stations are there, and there'll be a sort of projection map of footsteps going around, and also maybe making a virtual reality component to it. I have a grant out for this right now. I'm hoping that I'll get it, because it does involve quite a bit of funding to get this out. So here's a quick little video of it. So, a lot of the things that you see here are tropes from suburbia. Like, all of it. I'm like thinking about, what I'll do is I'll read the poem, look at some of the existing illustrations, and then try to translate them into using suburban iconography or vocabulary. Like croquet, only the goal there is the nativity scene. Not very nice of them. And then the party up there. And so the reason I'm bringing this up is that it's the background to, so here's hospice, right? This actually is a mini version of another artwork called Confluence, which was full scale, installed in Pittsburgh. Anyways, the reason I'm bringing this up, besides that I'm really interested in developing it more, is that these artworks that you have here, the mid-century modern automations, are actually, that's where they come from. It's from me living in suburbia, me living with my wife in this mid-century modern home, but also like this investigation into using the vocabulary that I guess I grew up in suburbia, and I kind of returned to it later in life, just like Dante. Like the first line of Dante, I'm not going to try to paraphrase it, but he's basically saying like, midway through the travel of my life, I found myself lost and alone in a forest, something like that. And so I too was 45 years old, moved into suburbia again, and it felt very alien but also familiar. And so the mid-century modern automation series is based on Legos. Legos is a Bauhaus product. And so, and also one of the coolest toys ever, right? So we had a Lego party one night, because that's what you do, I guess. And I was playing, and I was like, oh my God, I can totally make these things into real robots. Like, I know how to do this. And so that's where this whole new series started. And this is really new, like 2 years. The pandemic added a little time because I wasn't able to show them. But in my mind, I made them yesterday, even though it was 2 years ago. And they're just basically like generative art. Again, the ghost in the machine. Because these machines are designed not to be seen moving. They're designed to like be in one configuration in the morning and then change by the time, you go to sleep. And in fact, while we've been here, they've probably moved, we just didn't notice. They're just really slow.
They got a little noisy, so we made it.
What now? Oh yeah, their motors are going to start taxing, yeah. So you hear them, especially if you're here by yourself. There's also party mode that I showed Esther how to use, and so she can turn on party mode if you guys want. Party mode is much more active. So this one is the first one, MCMA1. Here it is in different configurations. This to me is a drawing machine. It's the same. It's just more fine-tuned, minimal, a lot of removed. Here's square the line, which is here. The reason it's called square the line is that this machine can actually become a square and a line eventually over its life cycle. Here it is in different configurations. And I'm really, still kind of coming to terms with this series. I don't quite understand it yet. I know that I love making them. They're all 3D printed. They're all the electronics are inside, so it's probably one of the most engineered things I've ever made. And I think I was telling Bill this the other day. The pandemic, I keep bringing it up, but it's like, I can't, right? Like the last 2 years was the pandemic. And so it was very much part of the discussion of this work. I had time to engineer these, so much time, right? So that's, I think, why I dove so deep into like, their function. Form follows function. Let me see. Here's another one. They're all like, they're not, the only one that has a unique title is Square the Line. The rest of them are just, it's MCMA1, MCMA2. Here are compositions. I think something bigger is coming with them, some bigger installation. I'm just not quite there yet. Here's in different configurations. Here's another one. And actually, the first one was this one. And it was actually my buddy that commissioned this. And in many ways, Il Young, I have to like tip my hat to him because he commissioned it. And that meant that it gave me the green light to actually produce them. And if you're an artist, you know that sometimes it's hard to like get going if you don't know that there's going to be a show for it, or there's a deadline, or in this case, there's a pot of money. So this is the first one, and it was actually the hardest one. I gave him a huge discount because it is a prototype. It's going to fail eventually, I feel bad. But the other ones, I think their lifespan's going to be quite a bit. Here is MCMA 0. But I actually, in the book, I think it's MCMA 6. I screwed that up, but it really should be 0 because it's the first. Like, it's the prototype. And here they are in operation. I think it'll start. Yeah, composition 1. So it's PLA. Oh yeah, the video is 4 times the speed. So, it's very rare that they move. Over the years, people have bought some robotic art from me. It's rare. I sell more painting and drawing for sure. But one of the things that even my own art, my own robots, they're annoying. You know, like you leave them on and you're like, okay, I'm going to turn you off now because you're driving me crazy. And so that's another reason why I designed them in such a way that they're quiet. Right? You might hear the motor for a moment when it moves, but then that's it, right? Like, takes a break. It's actually it's again, form follows function. It's a good way to extend their lifespan. If they're only moving every couple times in the day, I think at most they might move 10 times. Maybe. It depends on how long you leave them on. I haven't been able to actually capture this robot in its square and line form. I could do it artificially. I could actually just program it, but I wanted to catch it in the wild. I have to wait. And that's basically it. That's what I got. This is actually another piece, but this is something else. This is on somewhere. And now, if you have questions, please feel free. Yes, Bill.
You spoke very casually about designing this, making this, engineering this. What sort of life and educational experiences have made you capable of these very casual but highly sophisticated?
Yeah. So I think I told you this the other night. I've always been bad at math, and that always is not a good recipe for an engineer. My dad was an engineer. My brother is an engineer. My dad was also an amateur painter. So I got the art bug really from him and my mom, who was studying architecture, but unfortunately she didn't finish because of the kids, right? So when I got into, as a young person, I used computers to make animations, you know, whatever. I knew how to use a computer. I didn't realize that you could use technology to make art until I got into undergraduate. And I was really fortunate to go to the School of Art Institute of Chicago. They had one of the only art and technology programs available at the time. And I took a programming class, a legit programming class for the first time, and I found it to be, I just understood it, like I got it. I couldn't do the higher level algorithms, but in terms of communicating with a computer and like logic structures, no problem. And then I found sort of like a natural ability to like do machining. I don't know where it came from. I still don't know. But honestly, it's a lot of trial and error. Like, you know, if you're an engineer, you could go through the design without necessarily having to produce the thing before you know it might be close to working. I take a lot of steps before that, right? I take trial and error, right? Like, oh, maybe this will work. And especially for the MCMA modern pieces, oh my God, there's literally a mountain of false prototypes that didn't work. So yeah, I mean, it's just, it's a good question. I don't know where it comes from. Before the Art Institute, I was painting, and I still paint a lot. It's what I do most of the time. Because this technology stuff is wonderful, but it is much more difficult. Like, it's slower. You have to, like, one step at a time. It also involves a lot more money. So it's a giant, you know, investment sometimes. So it is something that painting and drawing always sort of kept me going on a day-to-day basis. But I don't know, I don't know, is that a good answer?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you seen these medical things where people go into them if they've had like a bad head injury or whatever? Have you seen that?
Oh yes, that research is fascinating. Yeah.
And it kind of is the same kind of thing. I mean, they're going,
Yep.
you know, like, it's trippy.
Someone asked me at one of the first lectures I gave for the Shadows series, she came up to me and she told me that her father had just passed from cancer, and if I'd be willing to like design something for him, you know, posthumously. And I was, yeah, sure. She never got back to me. But the more interesting conversation that we had was that she wanted me to train her how to use it so that when she passed, she could use it.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And it was like, wow, all right. Sure, right? Like, I'll go down that rabbit hole with you. But unfortunately, the email, and honestly, there was like an ethical problem for me there. I don't know how deep I would. I would have no problem made something for her father, no problem, because I kind of see them as techno effigies. In fact, if I had it to do it again in terms of titling the series, I think I would have called them techno effigies. But instead, now they're called the Shadows. I would have done it for her father, but for her, there was something weird for me there. Like I didn't want to take her money. Like it felt disingenuous. For her, it would have been truth. For me, I don't know. I don't know. So So that, we never did it.
When you were doing the research around the sort of paranormal technology, I'm curious what the parameters are that are supposedly,
Well, when I dove into paranormal research, what I found out immediately isn't that it's the Ghostbusters. It's actually, paranormal research is a legit area of research, and it's mostly about ESP, but not in the way that we imagine it. It's literally seeing if our brains and our bodies have other sensory perception that we're not aware of. For instance, there's one that is very reptilian that, we can see motion without necessarily needing our eyes. Like if you're blind, you might still be able to sense motion going by. And so they're trying to isolate what exactly that is in the mind. So unfortunately for me, they didn't give me the answers that I was looking for, which is what your question is. So I had to go into pop culture and pseudoscience. And so, the ghost hunters on all those shows, which by the way freak me out. They totally spook me out. I don't like watching them because they totally are, faking stuff. But I'm like, it's a ghost. And they use EMF all the time. They use temperature. And actually temperature, we all know as as kids, I felt something, right? It's cold in the room. Every movie that we've ever seen, breath comes out of the protagonist, right? So the temperature one was easy. Infrared, honestly, mine's crude. The real infrared ones is a full spectrometry of light coming through that you're trying to analyze and figure out what's going on there. So mine's just like one beam of infrared. I would love to do like a heat-sensitive camera, but I just want to make them myself. So it's like that's where where it gets back to. There's certain things that I can't dive into. A heat-sensitive circuit is crazy complicated, and I don't understand it. I'd have to buy it and like repurpose it in some way. So those are the parameters. It's really from like pseudoscience. It's from pop culture. But some believe wholeheartedly that is 100% the way you detect a ghost. And I feel it, like that's cool. Other questions? Yeah.
You mentioned art technology canon at the beginning. Is that a personal canon, or is that?
I'm saying it no, not a personal canon, the bigger canon, when art gets into big museums, big tent museums. His Minerals got into this big show just recently. Bob's gonna kill me because I can't remember the name of the show. The Paranormal in American Art. I traveled to 3 major museums, including Maya. Again, not to bring up the pandemic again, it slowed down that show big time because they had to wait a year. And yeah, that work was next to Bill Viola and Thomas Hart Bacon and, all some big players. So, I felt definitely honored and small to be in their presence.
Do you have anything coming up that we can kind of keep an eye?
Infernia, that piece that I was telling you about, I would love, if I get that grant, it's a creative capital grant, that's going to be sort of dominating my world for a while. I'd like to do this VR experience with it. I want it to be huge in scope. But mostly this fall, I have a solo for the MCMA series at its original location. They want me to make a full-scale version of one of those, but not moving, for the outside of the gallery. So that's actually what I was designing yesterday at the Tiki Bar. There's nothing like a Tiki Bar to get a design out. They don't have the funding for that, and we don't have the time. Outdoor moving robotics, yeah, the price tag goes really high. So this will be a still, but it'll be sort of incorporated into their gallery facade, which has one of my murals actually, so it's this interesting return. And then I'm going to Portugal. Oh yeah, the reason I'm going to Portugal is this actually relates to the Ghosts in the Machine. The voice piece, this piece back here, the machines that hold the protest. Wow, having to go through these. All my tricks are coming out. These guys. I want to make a protest for the dead. I want to and the reason, and this will be the last thing really, the reason I want to make a protest for the dead is that for years and years, people have told me that my drawings look Indian, like Mayan. And I didn't really study Mayan anything all my life. Like, I grew up here. You know, I know Chewbacca and fucking Skywalker and that kind of stuff. But recently I've been really kind of interested in learning more and why it is that my like subconscious draws in this way. And so I'm going to Portugal to sort of design a new machine that's more sort of multi-dimensional. And then I'm going to Guatemala during my sabbatical, which is in the fall, to visit Tikal and Copan and all the sort of Mayan sites and draw there and try to, like, I don't know, connect with my ancestors. And then the sort of resulting piece will be this kind of multi-layered dimensional, not quite protest, but message from the dead. I don't know. That's what's coming. Yes?
So, you grew up Catholic.
I grew up every type of Christian that you can think of. It started Catholic, and then it went everywhere. My parents were devout, for sure.
Okay, so you grew up religious. You've studied Dante's Inferno, and you build machines for the dead, but you don't believe in ghosts.
I want to believe in ghosts, and I do believe in the afterlife. I just don't know if Casper the Friendly Ghost is a thing. I don't know. I've never had an experience, except for, I'm going to have to go through all these. So one thing that I was having a conversation with earlier, oh my God, yesterday or 2 days ago at the opening, is that many times what we're doing with these pieces of the shadows is that we're actually making ghost stories along the way when they're installed. And at PAFA it happened. At PAFA, something weird happened. The machine went off twice, and I can't explain it. I have no idea why. It triggered the automatic drawing of the photos that I hadn't programmed into it. The curator called me totally white ghost, you know, like, it's a print, I don't know what's happening. And I'm like, I'm sure it's a bug, you know, whatever. Just let it finish drawing, and then, you know, tomorrow turn it on, or, you know, once it's finished drawing, turn it off, turn it on in the morning. In the morning, it went off again. And it drew on top of the first image. And then it never did it again.
Wow.
And I got, you know, once the show was over, I got into its program, and I have no idea why that would happen. It made this. It took those two photos, Thomas Akins and his wife. Oops.
Oh,
Oh no! It took both of those images. Oh my God, what's happening? It's this one here.
that voodoo in your computer.
Yeah. It took both of those images. They first drew the reclining figure, and then the next day it drew Akins on top. And you can see him. You see him?
Yeah.
And then it never did it again. And the news caught wind of it, and they had like a breaking story. It wasn't on the like legit news, but on like a, you know, on the internet. And they, you know, PAFA bought this. And so I realized that day it was a generative art piece again, because we've made a ghost story at PAFA. Forever at PAFA now, this is part of their legacy, this drawing. That's right. And I don't understand it.
Story.
And so getting back to your suggestion, this is the closest that I've been to like a supernatural event, a legit one. I still don't know, because it could have been the curator fucking with me. I have no idea. But Jody swears, so I believe it.
The demos, you tripped the sensors yourself just to get the
Yeah,
videos?
or I can plug in my computer and just,
Oh, okay.
yeah, I can just turn them on when I need to.
So that one's never gone off. The peanut.
No, his butter's never gone off.
What about this one?
This one is artificially triggered. Well, you saw it while we were talking, but like actually paranormal event.
Steady.
No. Oh, the Everson, when we installed the show there, they reported there was this hammer that I didn't show. This guy collected tools, and so I bought a bunch of his hammers, and I made a robot that could hammer nails. And the Everson reported that the hammer actually went off a couple times. But I think that was mechanical failure, because if the mechanism actually went off, the nails would have actually moved too, and that didn't happen. So, but it doesn't matter because no matter what I tell them, to them, it's real. That's right. And I found that out the first time I installed them in New York at this, new gallery. These two young ladies had the gallery, and when I was installing for the first time, I made an electronic circuit, like explode, and that actually fucked up, screwed up the computers. But I thought it was okay, so I left. And within a week, those ladies were calling me. They wanted to video chat. They were ghosts, like white as pale white. They thought there was like ghosts in the show because it kept going off. Like every day it would go off. And they, I'm like, ladies, this is probably from that electrical surge that happened. It didn't matter. And that's the day I realized that no matter what I told them, they were going to believe that it was the dead. And this is the sort of world that I entered into, not really knowing.
What triggers that?
All of them are triggered by the same thing: EMF, temperature, or infrared fluctuations. And it has to be all three.
So, I thought you said 2 or 3.
2 or 3, depending on which machine. In the beginning, I made it 2 because I just was trying to be real about it. But 3 seemed like, so I think that one's 3 and that one's 3. The bell was 2. So, if 2 went hot and the other, it was okay. But what I worried about with the 2 is that you could artificially trigger it. And so to make it more legit, 3 is better because it avoids someone doing it, pirate style. The temperature one's the hard one to fake because it has to drop to 0. And,
So that one goes off periodically, but it can also be triggered.
Yeah. It's
How
just,
am I supposed to know?
it'll say test on the screen.
Like, how do I know if there's
Also, if it does turn off or turn on and it's a real paranormal event, at least if the code works, the screen will always say like, what's it say? It's normal, event. It'll say event and it'll stay like that until you turn it off.
Oh, okay.
Right.
In the video, there was one that said
Yeah, it says event.
blinking
Yeah.
event.
Yeah, it'll blink, and then it'll stay event until the user turns off the machine. At least that's how the code and the tests have been.
So do you own this printout?
No, Palfa bought it.
They bought it. Okay. That's
Yeah,
fine.
I wanted to sell them the other ones too because we did some tests, but they just wanted this one because it is like they're part of their heritage.
Yeah.
It's really strange.
Nice.
Yeah. Anything else? My voice is going.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for coming out.
Thank you.
It's fun. Yeah. All right, there's cocktails and food. Have at it. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, for everybody who came in a few minutes late, just please feel free to hang out, look at the exhibition. We have some beverages there, you can help yourselves. And, thank you all for coming.
I just gotta turn off the recording.
So really, he is making peanut butter.
Yeah,
That's what I guess.
I don't think, it's just ground peanuts.
Ground peanuts, right.
I mean, that's peanut butter, yeah. But yeah, it would just make peanuts, ground peanuts, yeah.
Okay.
It's funny. That toy, it's a children's toy, but there's just no way a child could use it. No way. That motor on there is a pretty beefy little motor.
Wow.
It has a lot of torque for
Crunch
just to be able to crunch the peanut.
Yeah.
And designing a mechanism just to deliver one peanut was actually it was a lot of fun, honestly. It was a lot of fun. I just got to stop this recording real quick.